welcome to the space here. This is Toronto Friends Meeting, Friends House. And my name is Lynn Adamson, and I'm with the Peace and Social Action Committee of the Quaker meeting here. And we're very pleased to bring Polly Higgins here this afternoon. Polly Higgins, Earth's lawyer. She's going to tell you about her journey to make corporations accountable through international law for the care of the earth, care and protection of the earth. So let's welcome Polly. We want to acknowledge that we are here on Turtle Island. This is Indigenous land that we are on, and we are very pleased to be able to offer smudging this afternoon with Raven Courtney.
We're going to do a smudging ceremony. It's a cleansing ceremony. I'm sure some of you have done it before. It's kind of difficult because we're going to have to go outside. Usually it's just, you just go around and do it, in a crowd. But, we'll just, you just come and kind of like fan the smoke. I got a little bit of an accent because I live in Georgia. I'm Canadian, so. But I'm studying in town here, so. So you fan the smoke, and it's like a prayer. For those of you that don't know it, the smoke goes up, so it goes up into the Creator. And here's your prayers, and it's also kind of a cleansing, cleans you. And then we have strawberries, which symbolize the heart of the nation. There's different teachings around. So when you eat strawberries, like you're blessed with the goodness of the nation. That's some of the teachings that I heard. And then, of course, the water, which is, I'm also a water walker. I did a water walk last year, and I was blessed to do a water walk. I carried the water across the Dakotas, and if you look under Water Walk 2012, you'll see more information about it. I don't want to get into details, but the water is very powerful. It's our life. It gives us life, but it also cleans us, and also the complete opposite, but we won't get into that. So we drink water as a blessing, because it gives us new life. Every day we have water.
Thank you. See, I have a little accent.
I love it.
No, I love yours.
Gakwa de Tanaskakwa Giaje, Ogwayasira, Niwagasede, Onagdagega, Niwagawenjade, Carrie Jungets. My name is Carrie, barefoot Onondaga from Six Nations, through my mother. And, hi. Counter.
Is that lit, well lit now? I couldn't do it with a lighter.
It seems to be going okay.
Okay, good. You have a strawberry before you drop your camera.
work and enjoying.
So again, welcome back to the room here, and my name is Lynn again, and I'm with both the Quaker meeting and the Toronto Climate Campaign, which several people in this room have done a lot of work from Toronto Climate Campaign to get this afternoon's program happening, along with Angela Bishop of Greenspiration. And the campaign is also endorsed by Canadian Voice of Women for Peace, which is another organization I'm with. And I would like to just say again that we're just delighted to hear from Polly Higgins, Earth's lawyer. So I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, all of you, for coming here on a Saturday. It's so hugely appreciated. It's great also to see some familiar faces, which is just absolutely wonderful. I really, really appreciate this. And also to meet new friends as well, and how appropriate that we are here in Friends House. First of all, before I start, I actually want to say a special thank you to three women who have been really absolutely dynamic and wonderful and fantastic putting this together. So obviously we have the most wonderful Lynn. We have Angela. Where are you, Angela? There you are. Rita. Where's Rita? And one person who unfortunately isn't here, maybe some of you know him, but he really actually made this happen for me, was somebody called Ron Hart, whom I haven't even met, but he emailed me, and some people do this, very long emails, and he was great. You know, I mean, I love it, the fact that people get in touch. I just don't always manage to get back to emails, and I think it took me maybe 8 months to get back to him. But when I did, to say, actually, I'm coming your way, he was absolutely fantastic. And he then got in touch with Angela, Lynn, and Rita, and kind of mobilized them to make this happen here. So this is really, really fantastic for me to be here. Before I actually show some slides, I thought actually it would be nice to tell you a little bit about me and the why I'm actually doing what I'm doing, and how this kind of came about. Because in a way, I'm doing something quite unusual. I'm a lawyer who loves the earth, and that's not something us lawyers normally admit to. You know, normally when lawyers stand up to talk, they talk about the evidence, they talk about the facts, they talk about the rational. That's all here. They don't normally talk about what's here. Now, I think that needs to change a little bit. And actually, for me, something very profound happened 7 years ago. I was in court. I was representing a man who was fighting a case that had been going on for 3 years. We were in the Court of Appeal in the Royal Courts of Justice in London, and I was his barrister representing him. It was the very last day of the court case, and he'd been fighting a case. I was his mouthpiece for the case as his barrister, against really being badly treated in the workplace. And he'd suffered psychological injury and harm. And I looked out of the window, huge window in the Court of Appeal, and I looked out and I thought, you know, the earth is suffering enormous harm and injury as well, and nothing's been done about it. And my next thought changed my life. I thought, you know, the earth is in need of a good lawyer. That one thought took me on a journey of exploration. It wouldn't leave me. And the thing was, I hadn't come from an environmental law background. My background was corporate law, employment law. I was representing big companies where there were good people in them who were, by dint of their company activity, causing an enormous amount of damage and destruction to the environment. And I couldn't quite square that in my head. How was it that good people thought it was completely normal to be in the business of doing something that caused enormous damage and destruction? That to me just didn't compute. I couldn't understand how, you know, that made sense. I could understand it in the law, but I couldn't understand it in my heart. And so it got me thinking, you know, what if I was to represent the earth in court? What would happen if I did that? And of course I'm a barrister, so what are the tools that I need to do that? And obviously the tools that I need are law. But the problem is that our existing law isn't working. I mean, you just have to look at the Amazon to know that. In fact, the Athabasca tar sands to know that existing environmental law isn't working. And this got me thinking about what if the earth had rights too? Just as I have the human right to life, surely the earth out there has the right to life as well. After all, the earth is a living, breathing being. I mean, you can see that just by watching the natural cycle of a tree throughout a year. You know, those buds come out, those leaves come out, they then drop, they fall. It looks as if this is a dead tree. We know it's not. and actually that tree comes back into life again in springtime. There is a natural cycle. So I started talking to my friends about this, and they all turned around and said, Paul, you're mad. Of course the earth doesn't have rights. I still, you know, just because it's not written down somewhere doesn't mean that the earth doesn't have rights. And so I went away and I looked, because I thought, I can't be the only person in the world that thinks this. And what I discovered was, in fact, there are millions of people out there that think just like me. And when I looked further, I discovered there's a whole world of indigenous people who think like me, who completely understand that the earth has the right to life. It's just not written down. But then I discovered that, in fact, Buddhists think like this as well. They get it. So here we are, you know, the indigenous, those who are living off the land as their forebears did, that's 370 million people who think like this. Buddhists, 380 million. That's 750 million. That's the size of Europe already, thinks like me. It just so happens that in London, there didn't seem to be anyone thinking like me. So this really kind of gnawed away at me. And I was thinking, well, you know, what if we could create some kind of legal duty of care for the earth? You know, how would that work? And obviously it needs to be completely international. It needs to be at a global level, because there's no point doing this country by country. After all, the earth is, you know, this big. And it got me thinking about needing some kind of universal declaration. Now, it was my 40th birthday just under 4 years ago. It was looming at the time. And I said to my husband, you know, I really need to go back to Scotland. I'm from Scotland, I'm from the west coast of Scotland. I need time out to really kind of talk about this and think it through. I need to connect with the land to make sense on this. And there's a particular area in Scotland that's very close to my heart. It's called Kilmartin in the west coast in Argyllshire. And in fact, in Kilmartin, there are very sacred stones that exist. Rocks. They're quite hard to find. There weren't maps then, there are actually now. But we went up there for a couple of weeks, and I needed to get rid of the noise, the radar clutter in my life. You know, I didn't want television, I didn't want radio, I didn't want, you know, mobile phones don't work up there anyway. So it was a matter of just taking time out and connecting with nature and talking about a really big idea that I had brewing. And this had grown out, this was way back in 2007 when I got into the point of saying, what if there was a universal declaration of planetary rights or earth rights? What would that look like? What would those top 10 or 12 rights and freedoms be? And I went up these hills with my husband. Bless him. You know, he's on this journey whether or not he likes it with me. And actually, something remarkable happens when you start with a thought and you give it voice. And actually, there's something also about sharing it with someone, and there's a kind of dynamic interaction that happens with someone expanding your idea, playing with it, asking questions. And here we were, you know, up there, finding the rocks, these kind of sacred places. They have remarkable symbols on them. It's a staff, and it has 3 circles that come out, concentric circles above them. It's kind of like a modern day Wi-Fi sign. Wi-Fi sign.
Well, they cup and ring stones.
Yeah, they're known as cup and ring stones. Yes, exactly.
You got them in Yorkshire as well.
That's right.
I found.
Yeah, and in fact they have them in Brazil as well. I've subsequently
And
discovered.
then there's a swastika stone as well. Is that the same thing?
No, I'm not sure it is. Well, I don't know. I don't know enough. But what is very interesting is that there are various theories about what they symbolise. The fact that they turn up in completely different continents and they're over 8,000 years old. Something interesting is happening here. My theory is that in fact 8,000 years ago the ancient wisdom was that they understood these places to be sacred, and they could feel or see the energy, and that it is indeed an energy sign. So here we were up in amongst these rocks, talking through the idea of earth rights and international law, and how could it be that we could create I could create something like a universal declaration. And we got to, really getting to a point where quite easily identified what those 12 rights and freedoms are. And I was saying to my husband, but how do I get such a big idea to the United Nations? Because that's obviously where it needs to go. That's where the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is. How do I get something as big as a Universal Declaration of Earth Rights to the United Nations? I don't know how to contact the United Nations. I didn't know. And 3 days later, we were still up these hillsides, and I thought, I'm going to check my phone. I took it out of my pocket, turned it on, and lo and behold, it had absolutely pinging reception. Turned it on, and it rang almost immediately. And it was the United Nations. And I don't have that hotline. Someone else has that hotline. But it was truly remarkable. It was someone phoning up asking me to speak in a conference about something different. And I said, no way. I've got a far bigger idea that I want to come and talk about. Now this was July 2008, a few days just before my birthday. And I had this girl on the phone who had no idea what I was talking about. I said, I tell you what, please write this down. I want to talk about a universal declaration of planetary rights. I go and find whoever it is, whoever they are at the top end, and just say, this big idea coming from a lawyer. Let me talk about this, but be fast because it's going to rain, and we're in Scotland and we're up a hillside, and I can't move because there's no reception anywhere except here. And she phoned back 15 minutes later, and she said they are so excited at the top end in HQ, and I was like, what do you mean HQ? The Security Council in the UN. Someone had said, get her in and forget that conference there, we want her there. I had 5 months to prepare. I actually was speaking at a conference the day after Barack Obama's inauguration. I think 6th of November, 2008. So I had 5 months to prepare, and I dropped everything. I treated it like a legal brief and thought, okay, I need to assimilate my understanding and really research this so that by the time I speak about it, I know my stuff inside out. And that's what I did. And I spoke at a United Nations Climate Change Conference, a big international conference that they held actually, it was in Europe, in Belfast. And it was one of those days when you just don't know what the response is going to be like. Because actually talking to a Western audience for the very first time about Earth rights was just a completely alien concept. But what happened was really incredible. I got an enormously positive reception to it. Now, I hot-footed it back over to London, and immediately we put up our website, and a friend put it out on Facebook. This is before I understood how to campaign. And we put it out there, and I woke up the next morning to over 1,000 emails in my inbox. I now realise that actually putting up your email on a website is maybe not the easiest thing to do when you come up with a big idea. But I wasn't set up to deal with this. I just didn't know how to deal with it. But my life changed very fast, and I ended up talking all over the place. I ended up talking about this in Copenhagen at the climate negotiations. And in fact, Bolivia ran with this idea very, very fast. They got in touch, and they started running with it. I'd already been working with a lawyer on drafting it up. In fact, he took it to the next stage, and he then worked with them with it. So I was very delighted that this ball had started running very quickly. And in fact, here the world's first Indigenous president took it up and ran with it as well. And I think that's maybe no coincidence because it was coming from an Indigenous space of understanding. While I was sitting on a platform in Copenhagen, and a few of you are actually here today, which is just fantastic, who were there. In fact, I was sitting talking about Earth rights when I had a light bulb moment. Someone in the audience said, we need a new language. We need a new language to deal with this. You know, this vast damage and destruction that we're causing to the earth. And I thought, yeah, you're right. It's like environmental genocide. It's ecocide. And it was one of these moments where it's almost like you could see the light bulb going on. And I rushed home and kind of went back down that rabbit hole of researching all over again. Could it work if we created an international crime of ecocide to govern and to protect the Earth's right to life? Because after all, at the end of the day, what's happening here is that our life, our human right to life, is protected on one-to-one by the crime of murder or homicide. But if it's you and your community, then it's a genocide. Surely if we were to have an Earth's right to life, then we needed the international crime of ecocide. So that really was kind of where the journey got me to. And I spent 3 months researching and going down that avenue. And maybe we could go to slides now. We have a cycle of destruction here, where mass damage and destruction, which I'm calling ecocide, leads to, amongst other things, resource depletion, which leads to conflict, and then ultimately to war, which then leads to more damage and destruction, which is more ecocide, more resource depletion, more conflict, more war. And we have an ever spiraling upwards cycle. What we've been doing so far is trying to slow that down. That's not enough. It's not about slowing it down. It's about completely halting it in its tracks. It's about literally slicing it and saying it's got to stop. It ends. And that, for me, was really a big driver in this. This is not a halfway house. This is actually about recognizing that we need to stop this escalating vast damage and destruction. It is a violence. It's a violence to the earth, to destroy the earth. And it's not right at the end of the day. And I think we instinctively understand that. So David King, he was our ex-chief scientific advisor, and he said the 21st century will be remembered as a century of resource wars, an era of ecocide. Well, not if I can help it. Already we've had resource wars. We've had Darfur, which was a war for water. Iraq was oil. And so what I did was I proposed into the United Nations Law Commission in end of March 2010 was this definition. The word ecocide itself has been around since the 1970s. All I'm doing is giving it a legal definition. Now, the definition I've given here is not a listing of ecocides. It's wider than that. It's the extensive destruction and damage to or loss of ecosystems. Now, I want to unpackage this a little bit. What's that? Well, that's mass damage, basically, on a mass scale. And I'll break that down a bit later. Of a given territory, 2 different types of ecocide, whether by human agency or by other causes. And I'll break that down as well. To such an extent that peaceful enjoyment, now peaceful enjoyment, that's a term that's very well known in law, by the inhabitants of that territory has been severely diminished. That word inhabitants is possibly the most important word in all of this. It's not human beings, it's not people, because it's not just humans that live in a given territory. This is about people and planet. This isn't just environmental law. This is holistic law, if you like. This is earth law, and we're all part of the earth. Peaceful enjoyment is actually a term that is used in many jurisdictions right across the world. And this is something that actually goes back into, certainly within the context of British law, back into the 16th century, when we're looking at civil wrongs, where actually a legal responsibility has been breached in some manner or way, and that the person who is the owner of the land, or has title of the land, has a responsibility to those who are there. So if there's mass damage and destruction that happens here and it flows downstream and it causes an infringement on your peaceful enjoyment downstream, then that person has a legal responsibility to do something about that. So I'm taking something that's very well known, very well established in law, and actually I'm applying it to a wider context. This is about expanding our cycle of concern. Yeah.
A suggestion.
Yeah.
I see it as threatening our survival, not our peaceful enjoyment. Those words ring much more true to me.
Well,
Okay.
actually, this is very interesting. How do you pitch it? Do you pitch it as threatening our survival or our peaceful enjoyment? Because if it's threatening survival, you're going to have an awful lot of lawyers saying, oh, we're not quite at that.
Yes, that's right.
You see? Peaceful enjoyment is actually a health and well-being provision, where you can say, I'm certainly not in a position where I have peaceful enjoyment because there's instability here, we have damage to the environment which is causing pollution to our waters, da, da, da. So you can create the causal connections far more easily.
Standard of test is much lower with what you're doing there than what lawyers will twist to make it the other one.
Exactly right. Yeah.
You're working on first principles in a language that's been established.
Yes, absolutely. And this is also about, in fact, rather than inventing a completely new wheel, all I'm doing is using existing systems, but just expanding them out in our understanding to a slightly deeper level. So 2 types of ecocide here. We have human-made ecocide, which is largely corporate ecocide at the end of the day. So mining, fossil fuel extraction, fracking, deforestation, these are all ecocides. BP Gulf oil spill, that happened 3 weeks after I had proposed this into the United Nations. And what happened was my phone rang off the hook, because suddenly when you Googled the word ecocide, my website would come up and a lot of journalists got very excited that here was a legal proposal around it. So this was starting to play out in real time. Other causes, we can actually have naturally occurring ecocides. And this is very important. Tsunamis, melting ice, floods, earthquakes, when we have ecosystem collapse. What the Maldives are looking at the moment is naturally occurring ecocide with rising sea levels. And not just the Maldives, there are 54 small island states that are at risk of naturally occurring ecocide happening within the next 15 years. So this is very important that we also legislate around this. Now, the interesting thing is of course, with human-made ecocide, corporate ecocide, it's very easy to identify the perpetrator. You can literally sort of point the finger and say, as a result of that oil company's activity there, they're causing, X, Y, Z. Not so easy when you're looking at naturally occurring ecocide. But there is a certain connection. It's death by 1,000 cuts. You have some fracking happening here, you have it happening over there, we have some unconventional tar extraction here, and we want to do it in 4 other places around the world. We have some deforestation that covers 5 nations down in the Amazon. And what happens here is, of course, you end up, especially when you're looking at fossil fuel extraction, unconventional tar extraction, is that one of the problems, one of the outcomes from it is, of course, excess greenhouse gases, which creates an instability in the atmosphere, which then in turn creates not just instability in the atmosphere, but instability in our temperatures, melting sea ice, which then gives us rising sea levels and naturally occurring ecocides. Now, you can't say because the Maldives is going underwater that therefore we're going to prosecute a company over here. However, what you can do is you can prosecute a company for the corporate ecocides, and you can impose a legal duty of care on nations to give assistance to those that are adversely harmed by naturally occurring ecocide. That is very important, because what we're seeing at the moment in climate negotiations is the likes of the Maldives standing there saying, help us. And all other countries are turning away and saying, we don't want to know about this, we don't want to help. Because there is no legal duty of care to do so.
just around floods and melting ice, but you're saying that that's naturally occurring. What about the climate change discussion that greenhouse gases are actually creating?
Yeah. Well, this...
I can keep it simple, but just...
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the beauty with what I'm proposing is that you can be a climate denier and still get this legislation, because we don't have to prove for this law that climate change is happening. Actually, climate change is a symptom. It's a symptom of something else. We get instability in the atmosphere by excess greenhouse gases. One of the ways is because of human activity in here, in this corporate ecocide arena.
Would it be a symptom of gangster capitalism?
Well, you might put it that way.
They used to think slavery, the same group used to think slavery and colonialism were good business models. Theft.
Yeah.
And look what corporate tobacco did to us.
Well, this
Right?
is also, actually, I think you've hit on a very good point, Gordon. This is very much about restructuring capitalism. Capitalism at the moment puts profit first. Did you know it is the law to put profit first?
Yes.
Okay, you all know. Well, that's great. Most people, it is the law to put profit first.
I have another suggestion. They put their morals away in pursuit of the reward of the profit. There's where I focus on, eh? If I'm still selling you tobacco today, what value systems am I using?
Yeah. And this is absolutely right, Gordon. And in fact, you've hit the nail on the head, because we're going to look at that value system.
Could you just explain what it means that it's the law to put profit first?
Yeah. So, what it means is that as a CEO or a director of a company, your number one duty, legal duty, is to ensure that you maximize profits for your shareholder. Now, you may be sitting there in the boardroom saying, you know, I kind of feel uncomfortable about this because, in fact, it just so happens that, you know, the business that we're making money out of actually causes a huge amount of damage and disruption to the environment at the same time. Truth is, your legal duty is to maximize your profits. That's just collateral damage over there. Your legal duty is not to put people and planet first. And so in a way, law has caused the problems. So law maybe needs to fix it. Now, this is also about recognizing that we need to take responsibility. And this is about taking responsibility, particularly in a corporate context. When you create a crime attaches itself to a human being. And that's very important here. And this was a principle that was stated actually at Nuremberg. Crimes against international law are committed by, I mean, the same men, I would say. You know, it's not just men. It's not the exclusive domain of men, it's men and women. But most...
You're letting Margaret Thatcher out of it.
You're looking point out. But it's not by abstract entities, and that's absolutely crucial. Because what we've got at the moment is the problem of hiding behind the corporate veil. Now, this is because the corporate entity is known as the fictional person, not a real person. But when you create crimes, it's a human being that matters here. So you don't actually lock up the corporate entity, because the corporate entity is just a piece of paper at the end of the day. It's the charter, it's the articles of association. No point putting a piece of paper behind bars. This is about attaching it to the human beings. But more importantly, it's about who within the structure. And this is what's known in international criminal law, the principle of superior responsibility. So this is about prosecution of constitutional responsible rulers, public officials, private individuals. What does that mean? Well, in fact, what that comes down to is those who are in a position of command and control. So that's your CEOs, that's your directors, that's your head of state, that's your ministers of environment, that's your ministers of energy or climate change. That's about heads of banks, because this is ultimately all about the flow of money. What money is being invested in what. And that's very, very important. By creating an international crime, we impose a level of superior responsibility. Now, this came about as a result during out of World War II, when it was recognised that the person who was actually pressing the button in the gas chambers wasn't ultimately the person who was in a position of superior responsibility. In fact, sometimes the person pressing that button didn't really want to be doing that at all. However, far higher up in the chain, someone sitting in an office in a completely different place had made the decision for A, for there to be gas chambers, and B, for people to be gassed. And that is who needs to be actually in the court. And that's very important in this book. So this is really about those few people at the top end who are making decisions that can have adverse impact on millions of people right across the world at the bottom end. So this is a diagram to kind of explain where we're at the moment. Very much, I use the triangle because it's very much about command and control. You have a few people centered at the top who are making decisions that have impact on all of us. It's about boundaries. It's really about seeing the world in terms of land grabbing, good old-fashioned colonialism, if you will, where it's really about, this is mine. It's born of fear, in truth. This is something about the scarcity. We need to, make sure that we take this land and we use it and we maximize our profits. And it's also about how we view the earth. Viewing the earth as an inert thing. However, there's another way of viewing the earth, and that's actually viewing the earth as a living being. Now, when that happens, you're coming from a very different space of understanding. That's more about fluid communities. That's about our interconnectivity. That's about recognizing that, in fact, we are interdependent. The word economy has nothing to do with money. In fact, it comes from two words, oikos and nomos, ancient Greek. Oikos is habitat or home. Nomos is management. This is about good old-fashioned household management. So this is something that's also about how do we create an abundance rather than a lack. View the earth as a pot of gold. What we're doing at the moment is we're busy taking out. And very soon we get to the point when there's very little gold left in our pot. So we all start fighting over the last remaining bits. But view the pot of gold as something sacred. And what we do is we start putting back in. And that's a different relationship. In fact, it's a relationship. It's quite different. This is a world of disconnect. That is a world of relationships. So I say we need to turn this around. Make this small. This is all profit driven. And make this big. Now, the difference here is actually about law, believe it or not. This one is all about law of property and ownership. So this is all about, I own. Whereas this is about the law of trusteeship, guardianship, stewardship. And then what you're doing is you're creating a legal duty of care. I owe a duty of care. And that's quite different altogether. When you're in this space, and it's about property and ownership, you're looking about how you commoditize the earth, how you put a price tag on it, how you get a fast return on it, 1 year annual return, quarterly returns. We now have day traders who are paid an awful lot of money to actually trade in shares to just maximize return in any 24-hour period. That's completely in the space. However, when you're looking at this space, and it's all about I owe a duty of care, that's trusteeship law, you're looking at future generations. Different views for the earth. View the earth as an inert thing, and what we do is we impose a value. We put a price tag on it. We buy it, we sell it, we use it, we abuse it. It has no consequence. We create it as a commodity. View the earth as a living being, which is trusteeship law. This is about recognizing the intrinsic value. This is about taking responsibility. Now, this is where we're very much at the moment. Hence, it's bigger than the other side. This is where slavery was. We just commoditized.
That's where eggs and sperm are.
Yeah. And this is where climate negotiations are. Carbon markets. We're just commodifying the planet. Red and a plus. This is all about who owns what to make money out of it. And when that happens, it creates disconnect. Because you really are just seeing it as a piece of property by itself.
Intellectual property rights even.
Yes.
Ownership of my thoughts.
Absolutely. Now, I think this is all part of the old world, you see. The old world way of thinking is all about ownership, because that's actually about fear. I own, I want to keep it here. You know, the new world is quite different. It's about trust. Now, I want to take you back 200 years, because I think actually there are lessons in history that we can learn. To the days of slavery. What was so interesting then was that there was a man called William Wilberforce in the United Kingdom. He was a parliamentarian. He decided, after sitting underneath an oak tree, that he would take up the fight for the abolition of slavery. Now, he realised very quickly there was absolutely no point going around everyone that had slaves. In fact, by the time he came along, there were over 6 million slaves had gone through the process system. He thought it was pointless to go around and ask everyone that had a slave to just use your slave a little less. It's just energy efficiency, because that's what they were, human energy. He thought that argument was pointless. He knew it was about going upstream to the source of the problem and turning off the tap. And that was about 300 companies that were either directly or indirectly involved in the slave trade, and prohibiting it, closing the door to that. Now, of course, the thing was, industry met with a wall of resistance. They said, absolutely no, you can't get rid of slavery. 3 reasons they gave. It's a necessity. Public demand it. But what's more, you get rid of it, and we'll see mass collapse of our economies. Because everything ran in slavery. Or if not slavery, then the secondary industry that arose out of it, which was sugar plantations. The sugar industry. The first ever monocrop plantations that we had were heavily intensive, needed intensive use of slaves to be profitable. In fact, an awful lot of money was made out of it. Slavery was in fact heavily subsidised, particularly in Britain by the British taxpayer. Britain kind of invented slavery, I have to say. So we created that problem, we need to make it better. But what was very interesting were the proposals that were given by industry itself to put this right. They came up with, look, we don't need laws, too many laws out there already. We'll self-regulate, make it voluntary. You know? And if you really have to do something about this, well, we'll limit the numbers, we'll cap them. In fact, we'll create a sort of cap and trade system. No, seriously, yeah. Leave it to market forces to work this one out. What about tradable permits? So it's all these, you know, sounds very familiar, doesn't it? They said, we'll tell people to use their slaves more efficiently. In fact, one business leader suggested that they'll improve the conditions by giving them some hay for their bedding when they come over in the boats. Given that 2/3 of slaves died in the boats, a bit of hay was not going to make the difference here. But what was very interesting was that when push came to the shove, they said, look, limit the numbers and fine us if we go over the numbers. Catch me if you can, laws. Now, if we just go to the next slide and we look at today, different picture. Now it's 3,000 companies, same arguments, same proposals. How remarkable is that?
You're saying it's working?
No, definitely not. Now, what was very interesting about slavery was that all those proposals were laughed out of Parliament. But actually, there was more to it than the fact that there was an awful lot of noise and there was a growing momentum coming from the people that this is wrong. There were more and more people that were starting to sort of shout and say, we can't do this. They were standing up with William Wilberforce. William's argument the whole way through was that morally this is wrong. The moral imperative trumps the economic imperative. Doesn't matter how much money we're making out of it, it is wrong in and of itself. And what was very interesting was that there was one man who stood up and spoke out that made an enormous difference. And his name was Charles Grant. He was a Scot as well. Charles Grant happened to be the biggest CEO of his day, of the British West India Company. He was their chief executive. And he stood up and said, yep, it's wrong, we shouldn't do this. Now that was remarkable because he would stand to lose so much money. He would stand to lose his business, and yet he stood up and he did that. Now the remarkable thing was when he did that, from inside the ranks of industry, two things happened. Other people started to stand up and speak out as well. He gave permission to others to speak out. That was very important. That wouldn't say that outside closed doors. But also, the government listened. And it was very shortly after that that law was then changed to close the door to slavery. Now, William Wilberforce died a happy man. Those laws were put in place 2 days before he died. And he lived through a lifetime of standing up and doing that. It took a whole lifetime for him. Today, we're just looking at 3,000 companies that have been identified as the top carbon majors, the top destroyers of the environment. Now, I'm perfectly committed to actually giving my whole life to seeing ecocide put in place. Beauty is, unlike William Wilberforce, he didn't have Google, he didn't have Facebook. I do. So we can move faster, a lot faster. Now, I'd like to just talk to you a little bit more about property law and trusteeship law, because actually this is really, what I'm doing is I'm taking you on a crash course about law, in truth. Law is not really that complicated. It's just rules of the game. Rules of the game of life, if you like. Lawyers tend to make it sound very complicated, but in truth it's not really. You can ask a question of yourself. Whose interest is this law protecting? Does it protect people? Does it protect planet? Or does it protect polluter? 3 Ps. And depending on what your answer is, you can then decide whether or not it's good law or bad law. It's as simple as that, really, in truth. Depends where your moral radar is in this, actually. Now, property law, and I'm not saying we should get rid of property law, we just need to get it in a far better context. It's just that it's taken supremacy now. So it's about actually redressing the imbalance that we've got in legislation. Property law is all about ownership. It's about protecting silent rights. The right to destroy, the right to pollute. These aren't written rights, they're not written down in law, but they've become the norm. Interestingly, with the BP Gulf oil spill, what happened there was, in fact, it was a double whammy. Not only did you have the oil spill itself, but then there was the use of chemicals to not even disperse the oil, but just to get it to sink under the water so that it wasn't seen. So you got the double whammy of chemicals going in there. And actually what was happening there, it was killing the seas. Interestingly, BP called that Operation Kill. And that's precisely what they did. They accrued the right to kill. And that was perfectly normal. This is very interesting because, in fact, with the BP Gulf oil spill, we used that. We held a mock trial in London, the UK Supreme Court, just last year. It's got huge coverage. Sky News live streamed it to hundreds of thousands of people across the world. And we put 2 CEOs in the dock on charges of the BP Gulf oil spill and 2 charges of the Athabasca tar sands. And we looked at this particular issue in the trial process. And in fact, what we did was we set up as if the international law of ecocide was already in place and had been transposed into British legislation. When you have an international crime, then every country is supposed to put in place its own national legislation. or take out that which is contrary to it. And what we saw there, in fact, we used the real evidence from the BP Gulf oil spill, and we actually looked at, it was real companies that we were putting in the dock. It was BP, it was ConocoPhillips. It was a real judge, it was real jury, it was real legal teams. The only thing we couldn't actually get real were their CEOs. For some reason they didn't want to come and stand in the dock. So they were actors. But we had real experts and real evidence, and that was hugely important, because actually when we examined it, what came out was the fact that BP had had an environmental impact assessment done for the actual oil fields, not just for that one, but the whole swathe in the area. And as they have to, in fact, before they're given money from banks. And what was written 3 times in their environmental impact assessment was that clearly nothing would ever go wrong, so there was no need to put any steps in place to mitigate that.
But isn't that willful negligence?
Well, actually this is very interesting, because the thing is that bank signed it off as satisfactory, as an acceptance. Well, obviously nothing's going to go wrong, so they don't need to do anything here. Now, it may be that there is an argument for it being willful negligence, and this comes down to their intent, which is a lawyer's dream. You can argue for hours. My clients did not intend this to happen. And in fact, if we look at Exxon Valdez, this was precisely what got them off the hook, was that they said we had no knowledge what was going over there, and anyway, in any event, we subcontracted out. Okay, so the International Criminal Court is actually a relatively new piece of what I call hardware that's been put in place. The ICC was put in place, it was a document, it's called the Rome Statute, and it's codified the international crimes against peace that we have, which is genocide, war crimes, crimes of aggression, and crimes against humanity. That's the document that I want amended. It also sets out the International Criminal Court, where these prosecutions take place. That didn't exist until 2002. First case only started in 2005. Prior to that, we just didn't have an International Criminal Court. And you might think, well, why does that matter? But actually, it's very important, because what would happen was we'd be setting up courts that were situational specific. So Nuremberg war trials for the outcome of World War II. Rwanda, Yugoslavia. But it was recognized that it was too late in the day, after millions of people had been killed, to then go in and hold a tribunal. Actually, we need to preempt this. And that's why the ICC was put in place. And that's very important. Now, it's not the most perfect of beasts. It only has 4 courtrooms, which is really not enough, given that they get over 2,000 cases referred to them every year, and most cases take at least a year to go through the process. However, there's a lot of dialogue about how we either set up an international court for the environment run on the same grounds, or whether or not to actually be expanded, or whether or not we get a preliminary ruling where then it's actually sent out to another neutral country to then try the case, which actually I think is a very smart idea, where we start engaging other countries and using the same system. But the beauty is that it is an international piece of hardware. And what I'm doing is I'm saying, well, in fact, by creating a law of ecocide, it's about putting in a piece of software so that we can create something that the cogs then begin to turn. This is a right to life issue. I'm saying it's not just a human right to life issue, I'm saying it's a right to all life issue. Now, in fact, in the EU, we already have European case law on the human right to life that states that member states have a legal duty to protect life of people when their lives are at risk. I'm saying it's not just people, it's people and planet. And that's what an international law of ecocide will do, is it will expand that right to life aspect out that one step further. We already have case law in Europe that says states have a legal duty to close down dangerous industrial activity which causes risk of loss or injury to life. This has not been relied upon as case law yet. We should be using this for fracking. for instance.
And the Charter.
It's also, it's persuasive law to use it here in Canada. So this is law that could be used to say, look, this already exists in Europe. You know, it's not legally binding, but it is persuasive. Ecocide is a crime of consequence. You know, this is about actually getting corporations, governments to look to the consequences of their actions. At the moment, it is the norm not to do that. And by creating an international law of ecocide, in fact, you shift the norms. What is the norm today then becomes the exception, and what becomes the norm is that, in fact, you have to take into, more than take into consideration, it becomes a legal duty of care. This is just an amendment to the Rome Statute. We don't have to create a whole new legal treaty, constitution, convention. We don't have to do any of that. It's just simply an amendment to an existing statute. Now, the amazing thing is that to get that statute amended only takes about 86 people in the world to agree to it, to be law. Now, is there 86?
That's the same number as
Well, yeah, I mean, no. It just happens that it needs to be heads of state. So, but you know, this is it's a big committee meeting, isn't it? Now, the interesting thing is that this year we have a really big committee meeting happening for the Earth. It's called the Earth Summit, and that's happening in Rio in June. And on the table at the Earth Summit is international legal mechanisms. So ecocide is an international legal mechanism. Now, it can either remain on the table, it can end up under the table, or it can get off the table, and it can come out of the voices of those leaders. And they stand up and they say, yes, let's make Earth law at the Earth Summit. And that's about Earth rights, and that's about ecocide. And I believe we can make that happen. And I'm going to make damn sure I give it my best shot. But I can't do this alone. I cannot do this alone. There's two things going on here. It's about actually getting those who are in a position of influence to speak out. It's about leveraging our ability to actually get the people, we the people, to speak out and say this. Now, this is also about strict liability, which is the point, Gordon, you were talking about, and actually you came to Monday as well. I say this is a crime of strict liability. For those that aren't lawyers here, what that means is that it doesn't matter what you think or what you intend.
Yeah.
Lord Bingham, who was one of our top jurists, sadly died just last year. He made a very good point in a case where he said that, you know, we create offences that are known as strict liability when something is so indesirable of itself that, in fact, it doesn't matter what you think. It's just that it's really important that we close the door to it. Death by dangerous driving. It doesn't matter what you thought. It's the fact that you were dangerously driving down 70 miles in a 30-mile-per-hour limit, and a child ran out and ends up dead. You're still going to end up in court as a result of that. And what you thought is neither here nor there. Well, actually, if they prove that you intended to do it, then you're up in a murder charge. But the fact of the matter is that you will still end up in prison for death by dangerous driving, because it's recognised that in and of itself, it shouldn't happen. And actually, that curbs an awful lot of going over the limit, because we do know that if we step over that mark, then there are consequences to it. So it acts as a powerful disincentive. Now, it's so important that this is strict liability, because when actually you bring in intent or knowledge, you can literally argue for months and months and months. And believe me, there will be a whole generation of lawyers that will evolve as to becoming experts in how you sidestep your responsibilities by saying, I didn't intend that to happen. This has got nothing to do with intent. In fact, international pollution laws are strict liability, believe it or not. So if you end up, you're in a big tanker, you go bang into another tanker, doesn't matter whether or not you intended it, it happened, you have to pay the consequences. And that's why we have triple hulls now on big tankers. However, because ecocide isn't a law and there is no strict liability, when we have the BP Gulf oil spill, you end up with shoddy workmanship where they're cutting corners. If you have a law of ecocide in place at strict liability, BP Gulf oil spill would not have happened. Now this is something that's actually very close to my heart. When I was researching about the possibility of creating an international law of ecocide, I did what all good lawyers do. I went back to first principles. I looked to the evidence of what was already there. And what I discovered was, in fact, it's known as the sacred trust of civilization. This is a very old idea. As far as I could find out, the first written documents on it go back to the 16th century. It was used in our first documents of international law. So it was the League of Nations, which was the precursor to the United Nations, and it was called the Sacred Trust of Civilization. They lifted that and they then brought it into the United Nations Charter. What's so important about it is that you'll see that what it places as absolutely paramount is the obligation to promote to the utmost the well-being of, and it's that word again, inhabitants. Yeah. It's not just people, it's inhabitants. So we already have in the first ever international legal document in the world, as the #1 priority is a health and well-being provision for people and planet. It's already there. How fantastic is that? Then it goes on to explain that as one of the founding pillars that the United Nations put in place was the United Nations Trusteeship Council. Now, this was a very important founding pillar, one of the 6 pillars of the UN when it first was put in place in 1945. And the Trusteeship Council was put in place specifically for supervision of what were called trust territories. What that meant was that after World War II, we were getting rid of colonies. If you looked at maps in 1945, colony maps, over a third of land mass was actually colonized one way or another. And we decided, okay, we have to get rid of this. It's a very bad idea. But there was a recognition that there'll need to be a period of transition. You can't just walk out of a country and say, right, there you go, leave you without a government, nothing. So the United Nations set up the Trusteeship Council specifically to give, and it was legally binding to give assistance and help to countries that were transitioning. In fact, they called those countries non-self-governing territories. So those non-self-governing territories then could apply to the Trusteeship Council and say, we need help because we need this in place, we need that, and what have you. Now, again, it wasn't a completely perfect beast, but the interesting thing is that in the United Nations building, there is a room that seats 2,000 people, which until 1994 was very busy helping transition these non-self-governing territories, these old colonies, into a point when they could become independent again. They can't get rid of that because it's part of the founding principles of what the United Nations is about. And I say when we create an international law of ecocide, when it creates not just a legal duty of care and the crime of ecocide against CEOs, but the legal duty of care onto nations, we can open this up again. And any territory that is hit by an ecocide, whether or not it's a corporate ecocide, like the Athabasca tar sands, or whether or not it's the Maldives by a naturally occurring ecocide, can then apply through the international trusteeship system and say, we need help, and legally, you're duty bound to help us. That's very important, because that's going back to the sacred trust of civilization, about us actually engaging in a process where we're putting the health and well-being of people and planet first and foremost. And we can do that. Did you know that it's already a war crime to damage and destroy the planet over a certain size, duration, impact? But during peacetime, you can do it all the time. How mad is that? So, in fact, all I'm doing is kind of plugging a legal hole here. This is the war crime, Article 82B of the Rome Statute, and I'm saying, well, if it's there in wartime, we need it in peacetime, and we need to make it all time. So we already have this in existence. You'll notice that it's qualified, and that's very interesting because what it's saying here is that widespread long-term severe damage to the natural environment is a crime where it's clearly excessive in relation to the overall military advantage anticipated. So in other words, storming the castle and killing everything, for 200-mile radius around is clearly excessive. Now this came about during the Vietnam War, when for the very first time we had chemical warfare on an enormous level. Agents Orange, White and Blue. And it was recognized that this cannot continue. In fact, if it did, we would not be here today. It was recognized that that door had to be closed once and for all. But it wasn't a matter of just writing, it's an international crime to use Agent Orange. Someone's just going to invent something different. So it was the recognition that it was the mass destruction that was the huge problem here. And this is what they put in place. The interesting thing is transpose that into peacetime and change one word and look at how this plays out. So this is probably a picture you all know very well, the Athabasca tar sands. Now, peacetime. When you're looking at widespread long-term and severe damage, which this clearly is it manifestly excessive in relation to the overall advantage anticipated? So what does the community that live there get as an advantage?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, I can't see it. The community that does get an advantage out of this is obviously the shareholders.
Yeah.
So we're looking at one community that's benefiting here. And actually, in terms of how long that benefit accrues for, the benefit is really rather small. You're looking at profits for a very short period of time, maybe 8, 10, 12 years. As long as you can extract that oil, you can sell it for fuel. Boom, it's used, it's gone. Whereas you look at what happens to the environment here, in fact, that is an adverse impact that could take hundreds, if not longer, of years to be restored to its natural habitat. In fact, during our trial that we had in London in the Supreme Court, one expert was asked, how long do you think it would be to repair the damage to the tar sands? And he said, well, how long does it take to create ancient wetlands and arboreal forests? Thousands of years. So that is clearly manifestly excessive. We also even have already legal definition for what is wide-term severe. And this comes down to several hundred kilometers, long-lasting, a season. Severe, well, it's about significant or serious disruption. But what's interesting here is that it's human life, economic or natural resources. It doesn't just have to have a price tag on it. And that's very important, that in and of itself, the intrinsic value of a place. And that's the Environmental Modification Convention, which gives the kind of devil in the detail to the war crime. And I say we can apply that. So for me, I took a thought after looking out that window in the courtroom, which really was looking out over a bunch of trees, thinking, trees really do have rights too. And it's gone not just from that, but out of my head into written paper, into submission into the law, UN Law Commission, to actually then into a book as well, which you can get, you can order it from City Books here. And in fact, maybe what we'll do is if there's a separate list for that, the book for City Books, you can put your email down and they'll email you when a copy's in for anyone that wants that book. But you still have to pay for it. But what's very important here is that I took an idea and I gave voice to it, and I carried it through to see where it could go. And what I've ended up doing in the process is actually I've moved from just being a lawyer to also becoming a campaigner. And what I've realized is this is not just about changing the rules of the game, which is what law really is. It's about leadership. And this is really important, because I think this is about leadership in each and every single one of us. This is about actually us being voices for the earth, speaking up for the earth in whatever way we can. And I really do believe that actually for each and every single one of us, that the power is within us. So what I'm doing and why I'm here and why I'm traveling through Canada and down into the States in the next 3 weeks is because I'm speaking to people all over the place and lots of different groups, different people. And I'm asking you to help me make this happen. Now, this is really about how do we get people in positions of influence to stand up and speak out at the world's biggest committee meeting that's happening in Rio in June at the Earth Summit. And I believe we can do this. We have a golden opportunity here. And we're standing at a very critical point in the history of civilization. You know, we've seen it happen before and we can do it again. The moral imperative always ultimately trumps the economic imperative. It did for slavery, which was hugely lucrative. It did with the civil rights movement, when actually then we got to a point where we got rid of apartheid. And I say now, just as we did for genocide, that we need to do it for ecocide. Now this is really, really important because actually we don't have terribly long until the run up to the Earth Summit. So for me, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to decentralize this as much as possible. I'm trying to get this out there, and I'm asking everyone to seed this into your networks and to look around to who inspires you to call upon them and ask them to become a voice and a spokesperson for this. Because this is about each and every single one of us turning around to see who can help us then move this out, how we rally support for it, how we start to speak out and speak up about it. Now, Canada in particular has crucial role in all of this.
What are the other countries?
This is a country that has the world's largest ecocide happening with the Athabasca tar sands. When I saw the Athabasca tar sands, in fact, I was, at the very last minute, I was asked to go to the World Indigenous Summit on Climate Change in Anchorage in Alaska a few years ago, 3 years ago I think it was. And what I saw there was when a young woman got up on stage and she spoke about the Athabasca tar sands and she showed slides. And it stopped me in my tracks. I was so appalled when I saw those pictures. I had no idea that this was going on here. And this is land that, if expansion continues, it's going to be the size of England and Wales. It's 45,000 square kilometres. 48,000. This is huge. So Canada is en route to leaving quite a remarkable legacy for the rest of the world. I have been informed that if we even stopped absolutely everything else in the world, the Athabasca tar sands on its own would take us over 2 degrees increase in temperature. So,
It has to be stopped.
it has to be stopped. But more than that, I'm a great believer in permaculture principles. And actually I apply permaculture principles to everything that I do. I believe the problem can become the solution. Now you might think that's a tall order. Well, he might not be the man that we need to get on board here. It's maybe the unlikely alliances. And this is the interesting thing. Because remember, Charles Grant, he stood to lose everything when he stood up and said, morally this is wrong, it has to stop. So I'm looking for the Charles and Charlize Grants of this world. Those who actually have a moral radar and who are prepared to stand up and speak out, because they recognise that the legacy they're leaving is not the legacy that we want. My world, as I envision, is a beautiful new world, a world of abundance, a world where we're putting back into the pot, not taking out. And I believe that actually Canada could demonstrate really good leadership on this. Now there's one man you already have in your midst that has already demonstrated remarkable leadership, and he's called Lloyd Axworthy.
And Jack Lacey.
Now, Lloyd Axworthy, what was so amazing there was when he said, he was your Foreign Affairs Minister back in 1999, he was also head of the UN Security Council, he was President of the UN Security Council then, and he took up the mantle for abolishing landmines. He turned around and he said, okay, let's make it happen in a year. And everyone said, you're mad, there's no way you can do that. But he did. Well, he did it in a year and 2 months, but hey, 2 months. But he made that happen at a time when everyone thought there was absolutely no way we could ever do that. Now, I believe that's a man that could be called upon once again to help with this. In fact, he knows how you did it. He's got all the tricks up his sleeve. He could be a great man to get speaking up and speaking out about this and demonstrating enormous leadership on this. But it goes deeper than that. It's not just the big names, the big guns. It's about us. It's about we the people. You know, one of the things that I do is I write lots of letters. I'm a great letter writer. A couple of years ago I was sending faxes and letters to Ban Ki-moon. Because actually I think Ban Ki-moon is really important. He's the head of the United Nations. And if you look at the United Nations Charter, it begins with the words, we the people. Not we the heads of state or we the parliamentarians, we the people. That first ever international law document was written on the basis of we the people. So I think actually he's a really important man to get on board with these ideas. Because after all, he's the one that's going to be heading this up in Rio as well. So he's another person that I think we can actually call upon to demonstrate bold, courageous and moral leadership, because that's precisely what we need here. So what we're doing in campaigning terms is that we're getting back to a bit of good old-fashioned letter writing. Because actually letters are very powerful. Not just a petition being signed somewhere, but letter writing. And so what we launched on Valentine's Day was a website called lovelettertotheearth.com. And we invited artists. We look always to the unlikely alliances, to the constituency groups that might not necessarily look at law per se. And we invited artists from all over the world to submit drawings or paintings of love to the earth, which we put up on the website, and then anyone could go to choose a beautiful image, which then they could click on and add their love letter to the earth and send it on as an email to others. Now, we actually didn't anticipate how successful that would be because it crashed. Love for the earth overload actually happened. But that's fantastic. You know, that's great that happens. That indicates just how much engagement we had just on Valentine's Day alone. And it's not just Love is for Valentine's Day. This is something that we're building on the run-up to the Earth Summit. We are actively wanting people to engage on writing love letters to the Earth, which then we will send on to leaders. Because one of the things that we want to do is actually take into the political realm the understanding that this is about love. And actually get heads of states and parliamentarians speaking from a place of love and caring. Not about, the economics of it, but actually from understanding we need to create a legal duty of care because it's a moral duty of care. This is absolutely and utterly a moral issue at the end of the day, and not to be afraid to say that. International Women's Day on the 8th of March. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be sending out a chain letter, and we're going to be inviting men and women to send it on to 10 other women and asking them to put their name to this, where we're talking about love for the earth and creating Earth Law at the Earth Summit. But by doing this, also what we're doing, every time you pass that on, you're actually you're taking leadership, you're taking lead, you're giving voice, you're supporting and speaking up for the earth. Now there are many other ways that we can do this, it's not just letters, but we're using this because this is how we can decentralise it, use networks, get it out to communities right across the world. We'll be rolling out a huge campaign around who is Charles Grant. And we'll probably be asking people to put in tiny ads in papers saying who's Charles Grant, with a link to a website, so that we can drive and stimulate activity and get people engaged on the whole idea that this is about bold, moral and courageous leadership. Because at the end of the day, this is about us all standing up and being participants. So if I can take you, this is the last slide. Can you guess who that man was? Now, when I was coming up in the flight, I love flying. I love flying because it gives me time out from the usual noise of emails and phones and what have you. It's just the fuel that's being used that I really have an issue with. But it also allows me to watch a few popcorn movies, and I watched Batman, which is the hero's journey, actually. It's a whole moral story going on there. And this was one of the lines from the movie. It's not what you are underneath, it's what you do that defines you. Either you can be an observer of life, you can watch it happening over there, you can just let it happen and roll on. Or you can step up onto the stage of life and become a participant and help co-create the beautiful new world that we all want. And that's what this is about. But to do that, we need to change the terms of engagement. We need to change the rules of the game so that we put people and planet first. So thank you very much for listening.